to have Leota with us, and hope that song was a blessing. Hope you've felt the love of your church family. And so I think she is headed out here this afternoon to do a little plant shopping with her mom. And so thank you, Leota, for coming, and we appreciate all that you've done for the church and for our young families. Well, this takes us into the more serious part, I guess, of our service this morning. And so if you have paid attention at all to the news, if you've just almost looked out your window, or you were driving to go to a restaurant or to go to Walmart, you quickly discovered that there is a lot happening in our world. And I just wanted to open up by sharing my heart. And really, this morning's message is mainly what God has spoke to me about over the past, really, month or so. And so I've been purposeful to be very selective in what I've read over the last few days in particular, what I've listened to. I've tried to allow God to be the one to speak to me. I don't want to get what I'm saying to you today. I don't want it to be necessarily what someone else has said, although most likely somebody else has said it. But I wanted it to be a message from God to me, through me, to us at Summit Baptist Church, and really to our community. And so, if you haven't figured out the names in recent days, and I'm just going to give two, there have been two tragic, and tragic just doesn't seem to describe it best, horrific events that have taken place in our country. A month or so ago, there was a man by the name of Ahmaud Arbery, who, we don't know all the details of the story. What we do know of the details is that he was taking a jog, and he was an African American man, and he was jogging, and evidently visited a home under construction, and that area had some criminal activity over the past month or so. And ultimately, some of the neighbors saw what was taking place, and they unjustly chased this man down. And again, we don't know all the details. What we do know that happened is they chased this man down, and it ended in this man's death with 3 gunshots. 2 white men, really 3 white men, chasing down a black man who was jogging, and so just a tragic event. No matter which way it's sliced up, no matter what details come out, that should not have ended like that, no matter what. As Christians, we are never advocates of that kind of violence. And then most recently, 2 weeks ago, there was a man who went into, I believe, a convenience store, and evidently, from what's come out, he was a sick man, physically sick. He had some problems. He went into a convenience store and tried to pay for something, I can't remember what it was, with a counterfeit $20 bill. They called the cops on him. This man was, I think, sitting on his car. Ultimately, it ended up with 4 police officers, one in particular, kneeling on this black man's neck, and ultimately the man died. And that one event has sent our nation in almost unprecedented times. And certainly it is unprecedented when you combine the COVID-19 followed up by these events, unprecedented. And so the first thing that I wanted to share today from my heart is just what every human being should feel. that those events are tragic, that those events should not have ended in death, that justice should be served in those events, that there was much, much, much that was evil and wrong that occurred in those events. And so my heart goes out to those families. My heart goes out to the black community, and I'm going to share a little bit about that here really in this service. And so if you are a Christian, if you are just a decent human being, I believe everybody, I haven't heard one person who has seen those events, have watched the news about those events and thought, oh, there must have been a good reason. I don't think anybody comes to that conclusion. And so my heart goes out to those families. Our church should be in a place where we are advocating for the justice system to bring justice to these situations. And so with that being said, that is my heart. And I want today to look at those situations. I want to look at what's taking place with racism, with riots, with police brutality, with all of these things. In the next few weeks, I'm going to be addressing a lot of these things. Here's the key word: from a biblical perspective. If you have a biblical worldview, I believe these next few weeks are some things that God would say about these circumstances. And so most likely, if I do this like Jesus would have done it, there's going to be a moment where you're going to stand and cheer. And then there's going to be a moment where you're going to be like, I can't believe that Pastor Mark just said that. And know, and you can research this yourself, everything that I teach on, everything that I share is straight from a biblical worldview, a biblical perspective. And today's message is really this. I think more than anything else, the first thing that must take place, there's a lot of misunderstanding, there's a lot of confusion, there's a lot of, I don't get it, from everyone. Everybody is confused. Maybe confused in different ways, but confused. I believe that Jesus would say this to all of us right now. Profound, yeah. Maybe not so profound. But he would say this: listen. Can you just listen? Maybe one of the greatest lessons that I have learned in the past 5 years of my life, for a variety of reasons. In my marriage, with my kids, being a lead pastor, being a friend, living in a very diverse community. Maybe one of the greatest things that I've learned is this point: we must listen, no matter what the circumstance is, to understand, to educate ourselves. Listen to understand, and for once, we need to not listen to respond. I've said that many times over a lot of different circumstances, and I believe that that is what God would say to us today. Wherever you are, however you feel about this, I would just say, number one, listen. The Bible tells it this way. In James chapter 1, verse 19. This is a verse that you don't just want to read and then just forget about, but you really want to take it in. It says, my dear brothers, my dear sisters, speaking to the church, speaking to Christians, you got to get this. You got to understand this, James says. Everyone, you're an everyone and I'm an everyone, should be, see the screen? Quick to listen. Quick to listen. slow to speak. May I just say, I don't have a problem at all with some folks who haven't spoke up yet about all of this. And the reason why I don't have a problem with that at all is they may be just like me. I wanted to listen first. And I'll tell you this, all you need to know, if you're like, no, you need to speak, you need to say something, you have a position of authority, you have a position of leadership, all I will say to you is this: there is lots of scripture that talk about the power of silence. Now, can silence mean support sometimes or lack of support? Possibly. But let me just tell you this: time always tells the truth about situations and about people. And so if you're one of those people today where like, you got to speak up, all I would tell you is allow time to tell the truth. Because over time, if people are seeking God on this, God's going to give them the right thing to say, maybe not even the thing to say, but he might lay it upon our hearts the right thing to do. What I'm concerned about in all of this is those people who have been bullied into speaking when they weren't ready yet. Now, I get it. Anybody should come out right now and say that that was an injustice. I get it. That will come out over time. But give people time to listen. We're so quick to speak. We're so quick to act. And we're so bad at listening. James 1:19, be quick to listen, slow to speak. And those tuning in right now, and this is tough. You don't attend our church and you're just kind of seeing what Pastor Mark has to say about this. Biblical perspective, biblical worldview says this: and slow to anger. Slow to anger. Now, boy, that's would take an act of God and a miracle right now for many people to be slow to anger. I understand. I get it. I have fallen into the trap of being quick to being angered. But from God's perspective, with His strength, as we seek Him, as we cry out to Him, He can empower us to be slow to anger. I'm not going to talk about righteous anger or unrighteous anger. All I'm saying is, to everyone, wherever you fall on the spectrum, this verse speaks to all of us. Maybe you are somebody that needs to be more quick to listen. Maybe you're somebody who needs to be slower to speak. Or maybe you're somebody who needs to be slower at getting angry. I think that is the word for today. From a Christian worldview, a biblical perspective, I want to focus on what God has been dealing with me about. The rest of this message is from my heart. It's this: we need to listen. We absolutely need to listen. Over the last few weeks, specifically the last couple weeks, there's some things that I have seen, there's some people that I have heard speak that have caused my ears to perk up. As I've been trying to gather all the information on how I wanted to address this from a church level and at a personal level and at a community level, I was just gathering information. I wanted to listen to some people. I wanted to listen to some voices. Several weeks ago, 2 weeks ago, there was a trusted pastor, an African American pastor that I listen to all the time. It's this man. I'll show you a picture of him. Many of you may know him. His name is Tony Evans, an amazing preacher. He is a preacher in a church, I believe, in Texas, of around 10,000 people who attend his church. And I thought, I trust this man. This man loves Jesus. This man loves people. This man is an African American man. I want to hear what Tony Evans has to say. And so I was listening to Tony Evans speak on all of the things, the situations that have occurred. Tony Evans had this to share about his own personal experiences. He said that when he was a young pastor, he was driving into a community and he got pulled over by a cop. And the cop asked him, "What are you doing in this neighborhood?" No reason to be pulled over. He wasn't speeding. He didn't roll through a stop sign. He didn't look any different other than the color of his skin. But he happened to drive into a community where people didn't look like him. And Tony Evans said that he was pulled over by a cop based solely and completely on the color of his skin. And they told him he was in the wrong neighborhood. Tony Evans speaking out. I want to listen to this man that I trust. He said this, that as he was discovering that God had called him to be a preacher, he wanted to get some schooling, and so he wanted to go to seminary. And so ultimately, Tony Evans ended up getting into the Dallas Theological Seminary. Interesting fun fact about Tony Evans, again, very popular preacher. Interesting fact about him, he is the first African American ever to go through Dallas Theological Seminary. As a matter of fact, he almost didn't get to go to that school because of solely the color of his skin. Tony Evans had to endure that as a black man, as a black, godly, I love Jesus, I want to tell the whole world about him man. As he became more famous and people loved to listen to him preach, many were saying, "We got to get you on TV, we got to get you on the radio." And so he was calling up radio stations and TV stations. Tony Evans, a black, God-fearing, I love Jesus, want to make him famous man. Called up radio stations, TV stations. And they were all saying, "We like you, Tony, but we can't put you on the air for fear that our audience would boycott us or would not tune in." And so Tony Evans kept getting the answer no. The answer no. Can't be on this TV network. No. Can't be on this radio station. No. Until ultimately, if you know now, he is all over the TV and on radio stations. Do you know how Tony Evans got on to the TV and the radio stations? You might know this name. James Dobson, Focus on the Family. Wonderful, white, God-fearing, I want to make Jesus famous, I want to tell the whole world about him man. Wrote radio stations letters, sent phone calls, advocating for Tony Evans to be put on the air. Tony Evans got on air because somebody, a white man, advocated for him. He also went on to share stories of how, as a preacher, as a famous preacher, he has felt the need. And I have heard this story echoed by so many African Americans, and it just crushes my soul. Tony Evans said this, that he has had to have the conversation with his sons and his grandsons on how to talk to and address police officers if they were to ever get pulled over. And his stance that he tells his sons and his grandsons is this: I don't know where that police officer has been or what their background is like. All I know is that this is a problem in our society, and I've experienced it, and I've had friends experience it. And so he's had to train his black sons and his black grandsons how to talk to a police officer who pulled them over, to ensure that they didn't escalate a situation. Listen. That's what I did with Tony Evans. Just listened. One of the things that I typically do in circumstances like this is I tune out a lot of the world. What I mean by tuning out is I don't let anybody just have a voice in my life. If I see the typical bullhorn person, the bullhorn person, the bullhorn where you take the big bullhorn and you're like screaming out a message and you want everybody to hear, and it's not in love, and it's like, you're going to hell and you're terrible and let's riot and I just tune those voices out. Those from a Christian worldview, they don't help me. That's just boiling my blood. It's just getting people angry. But I tune in closer to people I trust. There was a man that I went to college with. He was a couple years older than me, or younger than me. And I was never great friends with him, but I always really respected him. He became a banker in our community, and now he lives in Heath, not too far from here. And whenever I see him, we talk, and he is just a great Christian man. I've honestly never heard this man complain, never heard him just say really a harsh word. And a few days ago, I was reading his post. An African-American man, great citizen. I want to read his post. I was just listening on my phone this morning where two reporters were covering a story in Minnesota. Minnesota, I'm guessing the story was George Floyd. And maybe the riots that took place after. So these reporters were in Minnesota and they were reporting on these burning buildings. And he says this: totally wrong and should not be condoned. But what happened next illuminates what has driven the anger and frustration by black and brown citizens. It gives the name of the camera crew, both camera crews, and they were both there, and the police were talking to both camera crews. And they were explaining to the reporters why they were arresting people. And then for some reason, the camera crew that was the African-American camera crew, same crew, there for the same reasons, he says this: Omar Jimenez camera crew and Josh Campbell and his crew were both there, and the police were talking and explaining to one of the reporters that they had arrested. And then the other one, after circling these other reporters as if he was threatening, he said he watched this on TV a second time just to check it out. Out of the two camera crews, one of the camera crews was being circled by the cops. Even though the camera crew identified himself as a reporter and said he will comply with whatever they wanted. And then he pushes pause, my friend pushes pause, and he says, I have nothing but love and respect for law enforcement and the sacrifices they make to serve and protect. Many of my friends are in law enforcement. They're not all like this. A few make it bad for most, and it makes me so afraid for my boys that are growing up. How is it that the officers that killed an unarmed black man are not arrested, But these reporters that he was watching on the news that were just there to report, those reporters got arrested. Are you following it? 2 camera crews. One camera crew white, another camera crew black. The police came in, they're like, we got some questions. They started circling the black camera crews, and they ended up arresting them, even though they said they were going to comply. And then my friend said, I just don't get it. How are they arrested? And these altercations with the police of Ahmaud Arbery and George Floyd, at least right out of the gate, there weren't any arrest of those police officers. Are you listening? Listen. There's hurt and pain from our African American friends, brothers and sisters in Christ. I want to listen. I was listening to a pastor, one other pastor I listened to talk, and it was an interview with another pastor. And one African American was talking, one pastor talking to a white pastor, and they were doing an interview after all this happened, and he just shared this story. He was like, isn't it a problem that the community that I live in, if I don't take a walk with my kids, with my African American kids, then I look like I'm a threat to people. He goes, I'm a pastor, and I have felt and heard and sensed people thinking I'm a threat in the neighborhood just because of the color of my skin. And so when I want to go on a walk or a jog, I take my kids with me just to de-escalate people. Heartbreaking, folks. That a good, godly man who's preaching the truth of God's word and wants to tell the whole world about this Jesus feels that way. Listen. And then I was listening also to, today I'm representing Licking Heights basketball. Most of you know that I coach on the basketball team, and our team last year was predominantly African American team, and I am wearing this for a variety of reasons, but one, I just want to tell our boys I love them, and I was listening to our boys on the team. I was watching their Instagram and their Facebook. I wanted to know how it was making a young teenage African American boy feel. And my heart was crushed as I saw one kid that I just love this guy. I just love this guy. This is the confusion that he feels right now. I want to show you a picture. This is the confusion that he feels right now. He posted that. Colin Kaepernick, who was kneeling during the national anthem, and had a lot of stuff went out about him in support and a lot of not support. And now they're like, this is what Colin Kaepernick was all about. Now listen, trust me, I know those tuning in. We got everybody on the spectrum here, right? I'm not going to touch that. But a 16-year-old boy posts this. An African-American boy posts this. We better listen. Right? At least listen. If that doesn't stir your heart to want to do something, what is? What's going to? Again, this is nothing political. This is just sharing a 16-year-old's heart about what has taken place. Whatever you stand, that's heartbreaking if a 16-year-old's there. So I started off just listening. Listening to people that I love. Listening to people that I trust. Yes, I blocked out a lot of voices, the bullhorn voices. I blocked them out. I want to listen to people that have a biblical world perspective and people who I know who are good people who are hurting. Listen, the black community is hurting. I don't care how you slice it. Our African American brothers and sisters are hurting. Find some of them that you trust. Your African American coworker, your African American friend who you go to church with, and talk with them. Just show them that you care, that you're listening, that you can see. I don't know one, and I'm sure there are, but I don't know one African American in my life, and I have many friends, past, present, and future, who are African Americans. I don't know one who is not hurting right now, who doesn't have some kind of pain over all of this right now. Second thing that I did is, as I saw these things unfold, and I'm hearing all of these things about police officers, and they're like, police brutality, police brutality. Like, I'll be honest with you, the high school that I came from, we were predominantly white community. I don't think there was one African American in our school. If there was only a couple all through my high school career. But when I got to college, and really after college, I had really close friends who, just biracial friends, biracial couples that were our friends. I've had Hispanics as close friends, African Americans that were close friends, and I've done a lot of things, went to a lot of places. I've been pulled over in a cop car by them, and in my own personal experience, I've never seen anything that would be considered police brutality. And so, that's not part of my even knowledge. I don't know anything about it. None of my friends even can tell me stories that would be considered from a different race or a different color. Like, most of my friends can't even tell me stories. So I started looking up. I started listening. I started doing some research. I started to educate myself this week about this police brutality that we're seeing. And before I go into that, can I just say I agree with my friend that I saw on his Facebook page. There are a few bad apples, but we better respect and honor our police force. Yes, hold them accountable. And by the way, you know who holds the police forces accountable in most cases? It's your mayors. Your mayors are ultimately responsible for holding the police departments accountable in most cases. And so do a little research. Who you voting for your mayors? Make sure that they have this in mind. But I started to do a little research and looking up some police brutalities. And let me just read some of these. Here's a police brutality story. Again, white cop, African American man. In July of 2014, most people know these names. It was a man by the name of Eric Gardner. I'm just going to read the stories. Eric Gardner was walking through a neighborhood in New York when two New York police officers confronted him. Police had had previous interactions with Gardner, and this Gardner was known for selling untaxed cigarettes on the street. This encounter quickly escalated, with multiple officers joining to restrain Gardner. And during the struggle, one of the officers put Gardner in a chokehold. The chokehold, which is now banned by the NYPD, ultimately killed Eric Gardner. A friend of Gardner's captured what happened on his phone, and the video went viral. And the footage immortalized Gardner's dying words, "I can't breathe," which became a rallying cry for the black community. Eric Gardner, a story about police brutality. Michael Brown in 2014, August of that year, here's his story. He was 18 years old. Him and a friend were walking in the middle of a street in St. Louis when a police officer drove by and asked them to use the sidewalk. What transpired next is still unclear, but Brown and the officer scuffled while the officer was still inside of his police car. Shots were fired from inside the vehicle, and Brown ran off. And listen, he was hit with 6 bullets in all and died at the scene. Michael Brown, 2014. Another man by the name of Laquan McDonald. Chicago police officer shot Laquan McDonald. Here it is. This it's all unsettling. But this is unsettling. Chicago police shot Laquan McDonald 16 times in the middle of a street around 10 p.m. Police said McDonald, who was 17 years old, had some kind of knife, and that their shooting was in self-defense. For more than a year, the city fought to release the dash cam footage of the event that could clarify the sequence of events. 13 months later, a judge permitted the public release of this footage, which shows that while McDonald was carrying a knife, he was actually walking away from the officer, who then shot him 16 times in 15 seconds. Walter Scott, April 4th, 2015. Walter Scott was driving his vehicle in South Carolina when a police officer pulled him over for a broken taillight. A bystander captured the events on a cell phone. While the officer was talking to Scott, Scott started to run away. So the officer fired 8 shots and hit Scott 5 times, killing him. DVDs outside of the store saw that he was packing up his things and was just leaving the scene on his own. And then, of course, we have more. I'll skip a few. Stephen Clark in 2018. Police officers were canvassing California neighborhood for information about a man who had been breaking car windows when they came upon Stephen Clark standing at his grandma's driveway. Body cam footage from 2 officers showed they chased him into the backyard. They ended up firing 20 rounds, later claiming Clark had pointed a gun at them. An investigation of the shooting showed all Clark had been carrying was a cell phone. Just this year, Breonna Taylor, just recently in March, was shot at least 8 times after 3 officers entered her apartment in Louisville, Kentucky, to serve a search warrant. They were there to serve a search warrant in a drug investigation. The police department said the officers announced themselves and used their weapons after Taylor's boyfriend fired at them. But Taylor's mom said police didn't knock. They're just serving a warrant. They didn't knock. And that Taylor's boyfriend was a licensed gun owner who thought someone was breaking in. Breonna was shot. And from my understanding, what I heard another pastor talk about is that the police officers who shot Breonna Taylor did not call for the emergency squad to come. And then George Floyd, part-time bouncer in Minnesota, was purchasing a pack of cigarettes at a grocery store when the clerk raised concern about a $20 bill he was using as counterfeit. When Floyd refused to give up his cigarettes, the clerk called police. Not long after officers arrived to speak to Floyd, they put him in handcuffs. They seemed to struggle trying to put Floyd in the squad car. Cell phone footage captured when one of the officers kept his knee on Floyd's neck while on top of him on the ground for nearly 9 minutes, while 3 other officers just simply stood by. Floyd, who repeatedly said he couldn't breathe, became unresponsive and was pronounced dead in the hospital an hour later. What I did is what I would hope you would do as you listen to the pain of our African American brothers and sisters, that you would listen what they're talking about when they're saying this police brutality. It's real. It's happened. And there does need to be accountability. And yeah, there needs to be balance, because God knows we need people to keep the peace. So we want to be careful with this, but there is a real thing called police brutality. And then if that didn't do it for you, I started to think about also just the history of the oppressions that blacks and African Americans have had since they have been here in America with us since 1619. The first African American servants arrived in the American colonies. Less than a decade later, slaves were brought in. This all occurred because a lot of times it was because of a cotton gin. They needed workers to produce this cotton. And then in 1831, and for about 30 years after that, 75 slaves decided they were going to escape and go to the north using the Underground Railroad. Could you imagine just being part of that whole process? And then, of course, we remember Harriet Tubman, who escaped from slavery and became a big leader with the Underground Railroad. In 1850, listen to this, Congress passed a Fugitive Slave Act, which mandated government to participate, the police to participate in capturing escaped slaves and punishing them. And then, of course, we are all familiar with 1857, the Dred Scott versus Sanford case. Basically, that case was stated, our government stated that African Americans, those folks with black and brown skin, were not considered citizens. 1863, a good man came on, I believe, Abraham Lincoln, who gave the Emancipation Proclamation proclaiming that all slaves are free. Woohoo! That's good. But then, in response to that, in 1866, there were some police forces who teamed up, and really some of them were part of the police forces that were called the Ku Klux Klan that was formed in Tennessee. I don't think I need to describe that. And then in 1868, there was a 14th Amendment ratified, defining that African Americans did have citizenship. 1870, they were finally given the right to vote. And then you remember in 1896, so now African Americans are citizens, they had the right to vote, but they weren't considered equal. In 1896, there was Plessy versus Ferguson, that case. Racial segregation was ruled constitutional by the Supreme Court. You remember that? It was called the Jim Crow Law. What did that do? We're equal, but we're keeping each other separate. Segregations. That showed up on school buses. That showed up on transportation, where there was a section for African Americans and there was a section for whites. So that showed up in schools. That showed up in offices. African Americans had to use different facilities than whites. And in most cases, they were not kept well. They were dirty and there wasn't much invested in them. Finally, in 1954, Brown versus Board of Education struck down segregation as being unconstitutional. Rosa Parks was obviously a big part of that as she led the protest of not giving up her seat that a white person was supposed to have had. And then our man, Martin Luther King Jr., our peaceful man, Martin Luther King Jr., was huge in the civil rights movement. And so the reason why I looked up all of that, I wanted to listen to that, is because without a doubt, the oppression of the African Americans in America since their arrival has been a tough pill to swallow. And if you're African American living in the United States today and you see some of these things take place with a white police officer and a black man, immediately you would think about, well, I thought Martin Luther King helped us with that, and I thought we had a law that passed that, and it just seems like it's being brought up again. And so you have to listen, knowing that the history of the oppression that African Americans have faced in this country isn't an easy pill to swallow. And it's caused pain. And then, not only that, but this is how I've spent the last of my time. I listened to people that I trusted, pastors and friends, certainly. Then I did a little study on police brutality. Then I reminded myself and researched just the oppression of black people in America. And then I did something that I would encourage every single person that's listening today to do. I called up two of my African American friends that I coach basketball with. I said, can we get together? And this week I met with a couple of my African-American friends, and when I met with them, I said, I know everybody's like on like alert right now. I said, like when we talk, can I use like black and white to describe people? And they're like, oh yeah, that's good. And so I'm trying to, be careful with how I describe things, just because as we were talking, I could tell that they were having some pain and hurt themselves. And so last year, many of you know, I just kind of want to introduce these guys. They're not here today, but I have them on my screens. I'm getting ready to show you a video of me coaching basketball. I was so grateful. I was, if you can say it, the minority on the team. Not very many white people were part of the basketball program, which is one of the reasons I wanted to be a part of it, is because I believe that our church one day needs to be diverse if we're really having an impact on our community. And so here's just a little clip of I believed was a really significant day for me as a basketball coach on the varsity team, just to volunteer. As I could tell, they were beginning to take me in and accept me a little bit. And so watch this little clip here. This is my birthday, December 14th. This is the team singing happy birthday to me.
Happy birthday, dear Postman. Happy birthday to you. Yeah.
And then here's a picture of the guys that I called this week. It's our whole team lining up to do the national anthem. And here's a picture. I don't know how well it's coming in, but you can see the arrows. Those are the two guys. The guy in the furthest back, that's Coach Sean Fountain. He's the head basketball coach at Leaking Heights. First time I met him, this is what I told him after we talked. I said, Coach, you're my brother from another mother. And we just love each other. And he has become a really good friend of mine. Sean Fountain is the guy with the blue arrow in the back. And then Coach Hayes Massey is the guy closest to us. When I first met him, I was like, hey, I thought this was a basketball team, not a bodybuilding team, as he's a big buff guy. And he kind of chuckled at me, and we continued on with business. But so this Thursday, I called them up a week or so ago. I said, guys, I want to meet with you. You know I love you. I want to talk with you about all that's going on. And so the first thing that we did is we went to Top Golf. I want you to watch this. This was this Thursday, and I just got a video of Coach Fountain. He gave me permission to share this. This I'm just telling you, is my good friend. I love this guy, and I hope you get to know this guy one day. He is awesome. So my guy, Sean Fountain, watch this video. This was Thursday. Top Golf. There we go.
I'm rushing because of the time.
You're all right. You got plenty of time. Facebook Live right now.
Oh!
Nah, just kidding. I like how when you thought the lights went on, you were ready to go game. Game time.
Flip it on, baby. Flip it on. Where we at now? Red?
Yep, no, yellow. 3 in a row with the yellow. Straight ahead, yellow flag, yellow flag. There you go. Hey, that's points. That's points, ladies and gentlemen. Oh, he's eager. Wow! Zoom in on this. Practice swing. Yikes!
Where's it at? Green?
Let's show everybody the real deal here. Yeah, right there. Yeah.
Next to green, coach.
So the real reason I wanted to show that video is just to let everybody know that I am way better than Coach Fountain and Coach Hayes at Top Golf. And so I know I asked if I could share that. And so what I've done in regards to this listening thing is we went to Top Golf, spent about an hour and a half, 2 hours there together. and we just had fun. We just talked about life, talked about our families, talked about basketball. And then we went to a restaurant back here in Pataskala after that, and we spent about an hour and a half talking about the issues of the day. And it was so helpful for me because I told him, I said, man, when I grew up, I had a lot of friends I had diversity in my friends. I just never seen anything like this. And so I've never experienced anything. Even my friends haven't experienced. Tell me about your experiences. And they did. And you could see, Coach Fountain and Coach Hayes are as solid of a guy as you can find. And they're hurting. And they were in pain. I just listened to them and I asked them questions. And did we figure out and solve the world's problems? No, we did not. But I'll tell you what did happen. When the night was over, I had walked in. I'd only been home for maybe 5 minutes, and I got a text message from Coach Fountain. He said, Coach, they call me Coach Rev. Coach Rev, I had a blast tonight. And then he said this, thanks for caring. Thanks for caring. Thanks for listening. I believe with all of my heart that's where we are today. Is we need, very first thing we need to do right now is listen. And that goes for everybody. No matter where you are, listen to understand. In the days ahead, I'm going to be preaching a little bit more on this. Again, it's going to be mountaintops and valleys. It's going to be rah, 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 shish kebab, go Pastor Mark. Wait a minute, don't go there, Pastor Mark. But it's going to be from God's perspective. It's going to be what God says. Next week, I'm going to attempt to, through the lens of God, talk about riots, protests, and police brutality. And I'm going to use this word. The Bible tells us that Jesus Christ is the Prince of, here it is, peace. Peace. Can I pray? Jesus, we love you. I know that there are many people that are tuning in today or that will tune in. And I pray that they see this situation through your eyes. Lord, that we would be stirred to listen to one another. Not to respond, but just to simply understand, to show that we have empathy, to show that we have compassion, to show that we care. Because there are people who are hurting. Dear friends of mine who are experiencing pain, who are worried about being pulled over. And that should cause us to want to bear that burden for them. You tell us to bear one another burdens, so fulfill the law of Christ. And Lord, I know that you sending your Son Jesus to die for our sins, you are the answer to all of our questions. The one who we place our hope and our trust in is in Jesus Christ. And that is the answer to all of these problems. If we can have, as I'll be preaching on next week, more peace in this time. Awareness, listen, but do it in a way that honors you, Jesus. That is certainly part of the solution. So I pray, Lord, for everybody that's affected right now. I pray first for the families of these tragic events, that they would do the only thing that's going to bring them peace is to turn to you, to seek you, to call out to you. And I pray that the rest of us would do the same. I pray for those who are hurting and in pain right now that aren't directly affected by these tragic events, Lord, that we would all just, as James chapter 4, verse 8 says, that we would draw near to you and experience and sense you drawing us near to yourself. We love you, Jesus. Bless our church. Bless our community. Help us to come together and listen. In Jesus' name I pray. Amen. Well, thank you for tuning in. I am pretty sure my armpits are sweating right now. A little nervous tackling subjects like this, but that's what God calls us to do. And so show each other grace, love each other, and listen. Tune in next week. Lord bless you.